Hey everyone, it's Allie, and a few days ago, GG did an interview with Gazzy, and in that interview, they talked about Magic Find and how they didn't think it was much of a problem. In that interview, they also said that they're going to be looking into it, and what I wanted to do today was provide some feedback on that topic specifically, as I feel pretty strong about it. And well, I want to bring an opinion to the table that I don't think many people consider, which is going to be the casual player base. Now, quite a lot of people love to talk about Magic Find from the perspective of a super high-end player and how much money they're making and how every other high-end player also wants to do Magic Find. And even I was doing 150, 200% Magic Find for a while because I do it, right? And one thing I think a lot of other people didn't consider through all this was how the casual players get impacted by all this. I don't care at all about high-end players. If you're someone who's made over 100 div, I consider you a high-end player. And to me, your opinion and how you play the game doesn't matter. You won the game. You know how to play the game. You know how to be successful in the game. Basically, nothing is going to realistically affect you to the point where you in the future can't possibly also find a new way or a new strategy to potentially make more money. You're completely irrelevant when it comes to discussion, and realistically, there aren't that many players in comparison to the total pool of players that make that much money and are what I consider high-end players. Realistically, the majority of players that are currently playing this game are people like Bob, or Fred, or Patricia, or Mary, who knows? People who have a 9-to-5 job, who have kids, have a family, who have 2, maybe 3, 4 hours if they're lucky to play the game, and they just want to have fun and work on a build that they found either through a guide on YouTube that look cool, or they just want to work through whatever build they're putting together themselves. These people are the people who are most impacted by all this Magic Find fuckery. And if you want to quickly talk about PoE 1 and how this wasn't an issue in there, we can then very clearly see how this then becomes an issue in PoE 2. In PoE 1, the way Magic Find worked for a very long time is that you had 2 stats. You had rarity and you had quantity. Rarity was considered the bad stat as it didn't necessarily increase the drop rate of divination cards, which are a big part of PoE 1, or currency, which is, well, pretty self-explanatory. Rarity mostly just increased the drop rate of unique items, and well, most unique items that were global drops were basically worthless, and realistically, to see a high-end item like a Mage Blood or a Headhunter, you basically weren't seeing one anyways, and you had to get very lucky within a season unless you did an ungodly amount of magic finding with it to actually see one drop. Quantity, on the other hand, did basically everything, and quantity was basically just a loot multiplier as it made you drop more currency, more items, more div cards, more everything. The thing about quantity is that it was locked behind you effectively using complete garbage gear that had no other relevant stats on it, and sometimes even made your character overall weaker. If you wanted to properly magic find, you had to put these garbage items on, and which effectively gimped your build, which then required you to basically have insane gear in every other slot, or a headhunter, or other expensive items to make up for the fact that your build is basically a walking loot magnet with no actual damage or tankiness or any other relevant stats on it. This was completely fine because this effectively turned Magic Find into a walled garden where, sure, it was just better to Magic Find, but it required you to have such a high-end build, which then made it so the majority of people couldn't Magic Find in the first place. And because you had to use gimped gear, only a few builds were good to Magic Find with, which most people just didn't enjoy playing, so they didn't bother. And the builds weren't necessarily tanky or powerful or strong unless you completely relied on nothing but your headhunter buffs and nothing else. Sure, eventually things like Defiance of Destiny and Progenesis got added into the game, which made Magic Find builds fairly tanky, and even myself, I almost hit level 100 on a Magic Finder that was effectively paper because of these items. But the point I'm trying to make here is that you needed high-end gear with a high-end build that costed a lot of money, that was very restrictive and exclusive, which then either turned people off from playing the exclusive builds that could run it, or just made people not interested in it. Because of this, it wasn't that big of an issue. It was only something that affected a very small portion of the player base, and when only a very small portion of the player base is basically doubling the amount of loot that they're creating, they basically are a tiny ripple in the whole grand scheme of the economy, and they basically didn't matter. The other thing as well was that there were plenty of things in Path of Exile that you couldn't necessarily Magic Find, meaning Magic Find wasn't a one-stop shop for literally everything. We have things such as boss fragments, or delve fossils and resonators, or heist items, or a myriad of different items that cannot be Magic Found and come from very specific sources where if you ran Magic Find, you basically died or you were unbelievably suboptimal at running the content. So because of this, not only was Magic Find exclusive, but it was exclusive in the kind of content it could run and the kind of items that it influenced the market. If we want to go over to PoE 2 and compare that, literally all of that is just not a thing anymore. Rarity is the only stat that we have now, which not necessarily gives you more currency, but it upgrades currency tier, which for the average player is effectively the same thing. And because we now don't need to equip random quantity gear that have garbage stats on them, given we can find rarity on every single slot in a very abundant amount. It's very simple for the average player to get to 100 to 150 rarity, which is what the community has found as the hard cap of where rarity really starts to not really do much past that point. And there's basically nothing stopping you from just getting on your amulets, on your rings, and well, there you go. You're now generating substantially more loot. The problem here is that it's not exclusive and every build in the game can, and because it's so good, should run Magic Find. This then just basically forces a problem of if Bob or Fred or Patricia or whoever else wants to make money, they are making substantially less currency than everyone else because everyone's running Magic Find and they can't afford the Magic Find gear because they're playing a few hours a day and they're not necessarily doing some sort of high-end farming strategy, or they don't want to gimp their builds by spending potentially more money on an item that is technically worse than what they currently have, that is worth more just because it has Magic Find on it. It's the same issue with boots. For my current build, I'm running this pair of boots. If I asked you how much money these pair of boots were, you'd probably say they're worth literally nothing because they are. I bought these boots for 2 div because these have no movement speed on them. They're worth literally nothing. And the item itself is, well, kind of good when it comes to the flat ES that it gives you. If I wanted movement speed on this with 412 ES, well, first off, it's literally not even possible to do. But second off, it would cost literally hundreds of divs. That one stat makes these boots go from being worth nothing to being worth a stupid amount of money. And the same exact issue is being caused with rarity on gear. If I want to get myself this ring, it's about 10 to 15 div, but if I want to get myself this ring, it's now 20 to 30 div because it has a tiny little rarity roll on it, and it's unbelievably stupid. So a casual player like Bob or Fred or Patricia or whoever not only is making less money than everyone else, who is basically making 30, 40, 50% more loot than they are because they're running a lot of Magic Find, but they now have to waste their money instead of upgrading their builds to make it more powerful for them to have more fun. They now have to waste it on buying garbage rarity gear. And if they don't, they just get put further and further behind because the economy just gets more and more inflated because we have no realistic currency sink in the game. And everyone's just generating more and more exalts and more divs, basically devaluing the 2, 3, maybe 4 div that they have. You might be saying to yourself, okay, Allie, but why don't they also just get rarity? Well, that's literally the problem. That question on its own should not exist because this effectively just means that all gear in the game effectively just has one less stat roll on it because one of the stats on it is now forced to be rarity. It's the same issue as movement speed on boots where it feels literally mandatory, and well, rarity on every other piece of gear now also basically feels mandatory. It's just the same issue as boots where nobody wants to get movement speed in the first place.
I don't know about you, but for me, I personally prefer Magic Find just be something that's in a corner by itself where if you want to gimp your build for it, you can, but you don't really feel forced to because you really have to gimp your build to make it work versus a stat that is so common that you really start to feel bad for not gimping your builds to fit it in.
Realistically, they could either just remove an attribute roll off of every item in the game and just buff loot drops, or just completely change rarity to where it doesn't affect currency anymore. They can just reintroduce quantity into the game and then make all the current Magic Find gear, which is literally worthless because the amount of rarity it gives you is such an overkill amount that nobody actually utilizes any of the Magic Find gear. And then suddenly, if you want to Magic Find, you can just run quant on Magic Find gear. And then we go back to how it was in PoE 1, where it's basically not a problem because it's such a walled garden of you having to run the garbage unique items. I just don't understand why rarity is the way it is and why it upgrades your currency and effectively gives you more currency, because GG is basically just fucking with the casual player base where they're already time strapped, they're already trying to have fun with their builds, and now suddenly they're told they need to get an extra stat to be able to make a normal amount of money. It's not just the casual player base. A lot of people don't also like this, and I've literally not seen a single person except one of the 2, 3, 4 losers who actually enjoy Magic Find have any other saying. The community sentiment as a whole really does feel like nobody likes this, and nobody likes how you're basically forced to either gimp your build or waste a stat on your gear for a stat that basically feels mandatory. And I really hope that GG take another look at this and to consider either just removing it from the game, as nobody likes Magic Find, which is most likely not going to happen given GG love Magic Find, or to at least just do what we did in PoE 1, where all things were balanced and it was just on garbage unique gear that you're forced to work around if you wanted to get more loot. I really hope something changes here, and I hope people can at least understand my opinion on Magic Find and why I hate it and why it feels so bad. I hope this gave people more perspective on why Magic Find is so hated right now, as it just feels awful to run. If you have any questions or you'd like to discuss any further, feel free to leave a comment in the comments below, and I'd be more than happy to discuss this with you at any time. I also stream on Twitch every single day, so feel free to come by Twitch and ask me any of your questions there. Or if you simply just want to come and hang out with other kitties and be a part of our community, I'd be more than happy to see you there as well. With all that said, kitties, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you all in the next video.